Anyway, welcome to the Serious TV Drama Podcast. I'm Scott, and joining me once again, the overestimated contribution to my underestimated blessing. It's Brian.
And as the greatest podcaster ever, I want to thank you for that introduction, Scott. I appreciate it.
I love that we've started this podcast with back-to-back totally inside baseball jokes that two people will get, and the rest will be like, what the hell are they talking about? Anyway, the reason we are back is to pour over the latest episode of Severance, the third episode of this second season, Who is Alive? Now, before we get started, it did occur to me shortly after we recorded last week, we neglected to mention the completely new opening credit sequence, which actually didn't make its debut until the second episode. Now, we could easily spend the next several minutes breaking it down detail for detail, but I'd rather keep things focused more on the narrative of the actual episode content. Suffice to say, the credits now have a lot of references to plot elements and questions for the season, as it doesn't only feature Mark, but it makes constant visual references to Gemma, to Helly, to Miss Cobell, and so on. I would simply recommend going onto YouTube. Look for the video that's titled 27 Hidden Clues and Details You Missed in Severance Season 2's opening title. It's about 6.5 really exhaustive minutes of a breakdown of the entire thing. It's very solid. I recommend it. We have nothing to do with it, so I'm just promoting whoever. I can't remember who put it up there, but it's really well done. That's all you need. You won't feel like you missed anything, and we won't feel like we have to talk about it from this point on. Although that final shot of, from the back of Mark's head.
Oh, it's great.
That's really beautifully disturbing.
It's disturbing to see an eyeball come out of the back of someone's head and it become a head. And I want to recommend for those of you who have access to Apple that there's some supplemental content. One was just released, and that is you can listen or read some of Rickon's book that was released, and I forwarded Scott the link when it came out. And a couple of years ago, there was an interesting sort of companion piece called The Lexington Letters that was released. Those are both on Apple Books if you want to go read them. And according to the show creator, they are canon. So if you want to read them, they're pretty interesting.
See, I'm going to wait for the any cut of that book, and I'll read that one instead. Hey, look at that. Made a show reference already. All right. So let's get to this episode. Again, the title is Who is Alive? It was written by Wei Ning Yu. This will be the first of 4 episodes that they have written this season. This is a writer and producer who had previously worked on another series appreciated by the STVD squad, Gen V. And this was also another Ben Stiller directed episode. Now, if the idea behind the act of severance in this series was this over-the-top solution to the work-life balance, corporations claim to want to strive for. I think I said something like that on our very first podcast, Severance podcast, I mean. Then unlike the previous 2 episodes, Who is Alive came closest to achieving some balance between the innie and outie sides of this luminescent universe. I see what I did there. There's so many great puns with lumen. Anyway, like he's lumen over. Anyway, so we can say that many of the episodes were actually like that last season, but a big difference. Because now we get more with the outie lives of, say, characters like Dylan or Helly or Helena or whoever the hell it might be. Plus spending more times with our lumen naughties like Milchik and, of course, the estranged Harmony Kovai. See what I'm going to do that the whole fucking podcast.
And when they're eventually bad guys, they'll be lumen Nazis.
Yes, you ruined it already. You got me. Ow. I think I just, how do you pull a hamstring while you're recording a podcast? How did that just fucking happen? Oh yeah, age. So I'll be honest, Brian, I was tempted to hold off on talking about Mark until later, but, I'd rather not engage in such fripperies. By the way, how many people Googled the word fripperies after watching this episode of Severance? I did, because I love language. I was like, ooh, tawdry or frivolous things. Can I rename the podcast, fripperies?
It's this week's version of a fetid moppet.
Oh my God, it is. So, but like last time, I think we're going to strive here to break this down character by character. Whether it be our 4 MDR office mates and their outie sides. And of course, the aforementioned Milchick and Cobell. Of course, they will probably mostly bleed into the other storylines, because, there's something I want to talk about, but I'm going to keep waiting till later. Let's just start with Mark Scott. It is interesting to note that, you can point this out. You can agree with me or not on this one. That the two of them, the two sides of Mark, have a lot of striking similarities to each other throughout this episode, perhaps more so than we've seen in any other episode of Severance. I think they're both clearly, from start to finish, they're far more resolute and driven than we've ever seen them before. So let's start with Mark, who had drawn up missing posters that cannot be posted. I love the idea of the opposite of how a missing person flyer is supposed to work, because you've printed up a bunch of them, but you can't post them anywhere.
Right.
So I guess his overall goal in this episode was to get the MDR troops marching to the same tune to uncover the whereabouts of Miss Casey. But it's really just him and Helly or Helena, whoever she might be, and eventually the goat people. So Brian, what did you make of the Helly Mark team this episode? And feel free to expand all the way down to those goats and the introduction we get of a new character. I always love when we get new characters, played by Gwendolyn Christie, one of your favorites from the Game of Thrones days.
Yep.
Especially that all-time classic episode you're a big fan of. King of podcasting. That was the King of Game of Thrones episodes when they're sitting by a fire for like 80 minutes or something. Her character here her name turns out to be Lorne. Perfect timing for the 50th anniversary of SNL, I might add.
Yes. I enjoyed this exploration into the goat world, but I think first we have to talk about that awkward moment in the hall. And I think I don't know if this is true or I'm projecting it, but to bounce off your initial thought, Outie Mark seems less sad and seems less mopey. And does seem driven because he now sort of has a purpose. And so his demeanor is much more in line with any Mark. And there's a genuine moment, the awkward moment of will they, won't they, that happens in the hall. And my question to you is, did he instinctively not kiss her because maybe he didn't get the vibe he would have gotten if that was any Helly?
I didn't, I'll be honest, I didn't read it that way, though that's an interesting take on it. I was glad you brought that up right off the bat, because that was my first major takeaway from the entire, put in quotation marks, Helly and Mark S storyline was that moment. Mainly because that, as you said, the awkwardness between them, more so than a lot of other things in this series. And I certainly don't mean it as a negative thing. It felt really real to me. Like there was something very authentic about it. Now, one can read into it a few different ways, depending which character's perspective we're taking. Now, bear in mind for both, if we go with the idea that it's Helly, not Helena, let's go by that first. Let's look at it on that level. So that means both these people, their entire existence is only all they know is what they've experienced there on the severed floor. They don't know anything else. It's one of those things they don't really get into that much, but they technically, like, they really shouldn't know about anything. Correct? I mean, they shouldn't know. I mean, that's why I was confused on Irving could drive a car. I was like, how does he? I mean, they showed that he didn't drive it very well, but I was like, how would they know about anything? How would they, but I guess there has to be some residual knowledge that's maintained, whatever. But the main thing is they have had no social, as far as their minds are concerned, they have not had romantic interactions with anyone before. As far as Mark S.'s memory is concerned, he's never kissed somebody before. And if that's actually Helly, not Helena, same for her. Although I don't know if Helena has either, quite frankly. Who knows with her, you know?
The only explanation, if it's Helly, is that she sort of surprised him and she kissed him. And in this scene, he would have been the initiator, and he seemed
right.
Nervous.
I forgot about the moment from before before she got in the elevator. No, I think when she did that before she got in the elevator, she was Helly when she did that. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Forgot about that. I was thinking more on his side then for that. But the way I read it was, I felt it was kind of a companion piece to the conversation they had last week, where on one hand, he was saying that he doesn't actually cognizantly, I should say, have feelings for Miss Casey, but he knows who she is,
right,
and who she really is to him. And he's kind of in, I think ever since he flipped for 39 minutes and flipped back. Yes, for some friends of ours, we're using some talisman kind of way of speaking, because it kind of thought of that a little bit when I was thinking about that. He recognizes the importance of who she is to the entity known as Mark, be it Mark S or Mark Scout. I think there's part of him that realizes they're two sides of the same person. The fact that he got to interact with his family, with his sister, with whatever, and saw pieces of what his life was, saw the wedding picture, found out the reason why Severance actually happened, why he exists at all. So I think, I don't know if it's guilt exactly, but it's almost a responsibility that, he's the reason why he's here at all is to find her, because he knows that somehow that's why he's there after what happened. At least that's the way I'm taking it. And yeah, I'll leave it at that, because I don't want to step on what's going to happen later on. Okay.
Well, let's move to the sheep room.
Oh yeah.
And talk about that wonderful, I mean, it kind of made me think of, was it the Invisible, whatever, Spotless Mind or whatever, with the little passageways, the Spike Jones movie with Jim Carrey,
Eternal Sunshine
of the Spotless Mind, like the the little like half passageway that they crawled through from looked like the the home where the goats come that had, did you notice the 3D printed barn? It was like a doghouse for the goats. And they crawl through that, and there's obviously feces in the in the passageway into this startling landscape that we saw in the commercials and wondered what it was, and got to explore this and see, some memorable characters like the big dark goat, like the Black Peter of the room, if you will, for anyone that watched the Witch. And here again, we had a wonderful language couplet, that are you mammalian nurturables? And obviously these people are shepherds, caring after this landscape and looking after these sheep, which make the sheep a bigger piece of the puzzle. We see the poster shown to Lorne, who then utters the quote, "We don't abide such fripperies here." And they've asked if you've seen her. She acts weird. And then we have a nice touch that she, warns them and rings a bell, and it's a Lumen bell. Lumen even makes, the call bell, the cattle bell for the sheep. And this landscape was really remarkable. And this set, I mean, added to the weirdness, because you have these little goats going around, but you have these weird humans. And my question I had watching this was what in the world do the outies of these people do, or are they outies? Like, are they there all the time? It was really, really an interesting reveal of this department. And those are my initial thoughts, and I'll stop there before we finish it. But I'm just curious what you made of the sheep and their tenders.
Okay. Remember the goats, not sheep first. That's okay.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. Well, because sheep would be cleaner for the cloning theory, because, that's been an established thing, many years ago with Dolly the sheep, but instead they're goats, even though I do think the cloning idea is interesting. I think the squeezing, crawling down the Carter thing, I think more of Being John Malkovich than Eternal Sunshine.
Yeah, that's the movie. That's the one I'm thinking of. That's Spike Jones, right?
And I think they're both written by Charlie Kaufman. So they're companion pieces. I wasn't gonna ding you on that one. It was interesting about the whole. Well, first of all, her asking, "Are you here to kill me?" It was like, oh, okay. They're bringing back the idea, reminding us that there seems to be almost a warlike mentality between departments at this corporation, much like the massacres that happened in the past or may not have happened in the past. And there's paintings to depict these things. You wonder why there wouldn't have been paintings of the goat people. Mammalians nutrable, very interesting. So, it was interesting the way she kind of almost waved off even the idea that there was a wellness counselor, which they're clearly in need of. And then later on, they admit they had seen her, and that's when they start speaking somewhat more quote unquote normally than we had seen them acting all this time. As far as whether or not I think that they're severed people or not, it's interesting. The way most of these people look, not including Lauren, but pretty much everybody else, whether they're dressed in goat dress or look like they've just been, on the, somewhere in Ireland, for the last, 89 years ago or something. It reminded me how we know that Lumen has been around for a long time. And even this building, this structure, this space, was erected or built, we saw from that video, back in 1870. So there's been people here for over 150 years. And I wonder if they've had generations after generation of people who are tending to the goats. I mean, the question is, well, why? What is it about these goats? It's, it's, as much as we're questioning what is it about Mark, what is it about these goats that it's so important to Lumen? And, like I said, there are theories that maybe it's something to do with an idea about cloning or something, but I kind of dismiss it since I feel that they've been having these goats for generations. Well, they weren't cloning them back in the 1920s or the 1950s or whatever. So, and how would they have even foreseen that they would be doing that? I don't know if that was even a concept or an idea, 100 something years ago. So I'm very curious about them. They feel as out of place here as the polar bears did on Lost and in the island. I do fear the eventual explanation might be as vaguely unsatisfying as that one turned out to be. So I'll just have to enjoy the other aspects of the scene. You pointed out you referred to it as a cattle bell. Although I think most of us would just plain straight up call it a cowbell. Because my first thought, which I'm sure a few people had, it might have been subconscious. How do you ring a cowbell and not have Christopher Walken on this episode? Right. And I said, oh, maybe it's a goat bell. No, it's a fucking cowbell. No, it's a cowbell. No, it's a fucking cowbell. It's a cowbell. Cowbell.
It does call back an interesting thought.
Yes.
The very first episode when Helly asks, am I livestock?
Oh, you went there. Right. That's true. That's true. That's actually probably even more important. That's actually 10 times more important. It also calls back something Bert had said, last season when they talked about the way weird stories and rumors have, bounced around Lumen as far as other departments. And at one point he said that they had heard that, the people at MDR had pouches. Like they weren't human, or they were human hybrids of some kind, like kangaroos or something. So the fact that they actually, towards the end of their encounter, we would like to see your bellies, to prove that they weren't pouches. Like, okay, that's been a thing, and that made its way all around. There's the endless corridors. You kind of wonder just how many departments that remain. It's like, I hate bringing up Lost this many times. I'm doing that. But you know how on Lost we kept waiting for like a new hatch. It's like, oh look, they've discovered a new hatch, and this is a new this, and it's new that. Oh, here's there's going to be an underwater hatch. I feel like we're waiting for all the new departments. Like, at any point you're going to turn down a corridor and find a door that hasn't been opened before, and it's going to be like, oh, here's some goat people. What's going to be next? Here's a room where it's like an endless stream of 3D printers that seem to be printing things that make no fucking sense. Whatever.
Right. Yeah, it was that was fascinating, and I think the question it raises is, are all the departments afraid of each other, or are all the departments afraid of MDR? And is MDR the boogeyman to all of the other departments? And if they went anywhere, is that why they're hesitant to answer their questions until Mark convinces her to admit that she had seen Gemma? Is there a built-in fear trigger associated in all the departments with MDR?
That's a great question, and I'm going to just, take a half-court shot of whatever at that one right now. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say because the few other departments that we've seen, even if we don't quite understand what their overall purpose is, at least what they're doing, there's something tangible there. Like, yes, we have no clue why there are goats here. What's going on? Why goats? But what are they doing? They're, as you said, they're tending to the goats. They're being basically shepherds. They're raising goats here. We don't know why they're raising goats, but at least it's a tangible thing they're doing. Or like the department that Bert was from, whether it be switching up the decor around the different, buildings and departments, or as we uncover how they're actually creating things like 3D, almost like these oversized 3D printers, and they're creating objects, which we hear from later in this episode, they're making things that are being shipped elsewhere. We'll get to that later. But at least, okay, one can tangibly see what that department is doing. MDR, the M could also, it's macro data, it could be mysterious because what they're doing, even when we see it, we don't know what the hell it is. It's like you're grouping up happy or sad or scary numbers and putting them in baskets. Makes no sense compared to tending for goats or actually manufacturing, little 3D projects or basically putting up paintings. At least I understand what you're doing to some extent. So I think I think you're right. I think they have been made out to be the quote unquote, the department that everyone else would be worried about. Maybe because they don't want anyone fucking with that department, because what they're working on, whatever we're trying to figure out what it is by far the important thing. That's the Cold Harbor thing, whatever that is. That's the important thing compared to whatever. And I think everything else is in support of that.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, if you're at a company and you talk to people and you don't have anything in common and you talk about your job, all the people from other departments can actually say what they're doing.
Right.
They know what they're doing. Like at the end of the day, I made this, I watched this goat, I changed this painting. If you talk to somebody from MDR, they themselves couldn't even tell you what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's that's the beauty of it. And then, so I thought it was really interesting that we lace this with some other stories, but then we sort of jump to, once they leave, and let me just give a call out, the ominous of "you should have left," and then all the people walk over the hill. That was really a great moment, and they encircle Mark and Helly. But then in episode 3, we are reunited with Asil Ragabi, and we see Mark has worked with Devin on doing something that we're not sure what's happening, and he's building something in his basement. Devin leaves to go join him, and he's trying to burn an image on his eyelids that would last longer than 1 minute and 42 seconds, because that's what he timed as the walk in. And then Asil Ragabi appears and sets in motion something I thought happened really fast in this show. And I got to give this show credit. A lot of mystery box shows get complaints because they sort of drag out things. This show seems to be moving pretty quickly. And we get talk of Gemma. We once again hear about Petey, reintegration. And we have a really sort of remarkable end where Mark rather quickly agrees to reintegration, is then placed on a table or placed in a chair. And through the manipulation of brainwaves, Ragabi's able to first make him move his hand in a way that was kind of creepy, like makes you think, if she knows how to do this stuff, could those chips control someone's body? Could they activate those chips and make, a worker attack? And Mark shifts between himself and Mark on the conference room table, changes clothes, shifts between back and forth. And then for the first music mention of the podcast, we end with, in my opinion, and I think it's probably well accepted, the best non-Keith Moon Who song, Eminence Front, a really strong ending and end credits. And so Mark dives back into the deep end at the end of this, and we're going to see what happens with reintegration.
Yeah. It, as you said, it defied our expectations. That's the thing with shows like this, and to use the phrasings that's been the parlance of our podcast for the last several years, and sometimes we use it just to mock you, Brian, whatever. When we watch these top tier shows, whether it be Succession, and the way we all thought the final fate of Logan Roy was going to happen much later than it ended up doing, or I can go back 11 and a half years. When Walter White tells Hank to tread lightly, that happened a lot faster than we thought it was going to. I think television series like these, the great ones, tend to smash our expectations. They forge ahead sooner than we ever thought they would. And they don't drag things out the way we would expect, or the way most shows tend to. Now, the thing that he's trying to do, just to be clear, it's the after image that would be on his retina. So it's kind of like, cause it reminded me sort of like when I'm in pain and if something sudden happens and I close my eyes really quick. And then even though my eyes are closed, if it happened like in a room, say I stub my toe really badly in the bathroom, you see but you close your eyes, you will sometimes still, even with your eyes closed and your eyes open again, you will see like the patterns of the tile, because it kind of burned there just for a moment. He's literally trying to do that. And I love when the woman shows up finally, who's been wondering, she knows exactly what he's doing. I love that. She's like, you're trying to burn it off. It's not going to work. Yeah. The elevator resets. I love oh, okay. Because and she points out the problem with the plan, which I thought when he's talking with his sister. By the way, once again, I love the interactions between Mark Scout and Devin, his sister. Talking about genuine, I never questioned them being brother and sister and how they get along. And there's a certain kind of great little bit of chemistry every time those two interact. But the fact that they didn't really plan out, okay, you can get this message, who is alive? Who did you mean when you were saying? That's why I love the reveal of who is alive was, asking what he meant at the end of last. It's like, how are you going to get the answer? What's he going to do to get you the answer? Because there isn't a way to do it technically. You can't bring up anything written. What you gonna do? I didn't think that far ahead. What's the point of this?
Yeah, I think to just respond to what you said a minute ago. I think that this whole thing is an illustration of that, and that's that great TV dashes forward, and that keeps you almost more off balance than keeping you in place, where your sense of mystery becomes complacent and you get bored, and now you move quickly from this thing that you thought, oh, is he going to do this? And they spend the time to build up him timing the trip in, and then it's just over. And
right.
It's really a fascinating way they did it.
I mean, I'm not in the habit of forecasting what I think will happen throughout the season when the season starts, because that's idiocy. But I will say, similar to like when we mentioned, the passing of Logan Roy on Succession, with this show, I was pretty sure they were going to have Mark deal with the idea of actually reintegrating. But I thought we were going to get their 7th, 8th episode of a 10-episode season, not at the end of a 3rd episode. I love the moment when he gets, again, the fact we get it quicker than we think. Basically a confirmation about Gemma. I mean, that's a straight up confirmation there. And the way it affects him, because it almost seems like it makes him almost physically ill. And it was reminiscent of an episode from last season when we see him going to the site of the car accident, and the way he reacts when he's holding on to the tree that I guess the car presumably crashed into. We assumed, whatever, and the way he's hunched over, and he looks like that again. And at that point, there's no doubt what he wants to do. When he basically said his answer is, "I want to see my wife." I mean, that's really powerful. And then, like I said, that maybe even more so than the way we've been seeing Mark S down there, even though he's very strident as well. That they're really linking up. You had gone over the reintegration process and what we saw. That I did like when we see him appearing on the table, as just the way we saw Helly, and we hear Petey's voice speaking, saying the same words, the script that he had used on Helly. I thought that was really kind of great. And I absolutely agree with you about using the Who song. There was like the 1 or 2% of me that was going, don't, you're almost a little too on the nose, but I'll let it be because it's such a great song. It's not an over. If you had picked up a song that was so overplayed, like really, it'd be like a show using, I don't know, Hallelujah or something. Like, oh, really? God, no. But this, I was like, oh, I know that it was. But the funny thing was, it's one of those songs that I often forget what the actual title is. And I just keep on thinking about the people forget part, which is perfect for what's going on. But the Who, for me personally, as someone of a certain age, even, if I go back 3 or 4 decades when I was a kid, there were certain Who songs that I always thought were one title, and then it turned out, well, that's not the title of the song, you idiot. You're like, it's like, I don't listen to the DJ. I'm 7 years old. Leave me alone.
Right.
I thought the song was called Teenage Wasteland. It's called Bob O'Reilly. They never say Bob O'Reilly. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like that Led Zeppelin song. I don't hear a black dog barking anywhere. They don't even say black dog. What the fuck? Don't they know how to name songs? And what about Chinatown? Anyway, so I mean, obviously the Mark storyline overall was, really the biggest thing in this episode, and it's very pushing the story forward in a way that I don't think we were expecting at this point, because what's going to be interesting is if this reintegration has happened, and it seems like it did, where do we go from here? Does he convey that to any of them? He won't necessarily know them, which is another situation. He won't know who Dylan is. He won't know who Irving is. What's going to happen there? And then we've got the Helly/Helena situation. If she's actually Helena, will she pick up on the fact that this isn't him? there's so many little factors there. I love that it's kind of like, okay, now you're making this far more complicated, and how many ways this can go horribly, horribly wrong.
Right. Or will we see that the reintegration is not seamless, and he'll bounce back and forth between
right, yeah,
Penny and Audi Mark, and suddenly he'll find himself somewhere and not know why he's there, what's happening, or who the people are around him. But then he'll be back in a minute.
Right. Just because she claims that, well, two things. She had said last season that there were things that PD was supposed to do that he didn't do, which led to the issues he was having. And I think, now correct me if I'm wrong, I think she also says that what she's doing now is better than what they had done before. They've perfected it more. Although part of me was like, how do you know that? Are there other people that you've reintegrated? Because we wouldn't,
right.
And will we find that out? I don't know. Before we get to the next character track, I want to quickly follow up with a thought that we were talking about last week, when we were talking about the cars on Severance. Something that I brought up, that was brought up by my friends who are fans of the podcast, Adrian and Mike. And because it was the whole thing was, it hadn't occurred to me because, I just wasn't paying attention to stuff going on the surface world, but you were aware of it, and you were keenly aware of it, in fact. Now, and by the way, if you said this already and I just blanked on it, then blame my early onset of Alzheimer's, whatever, but I don't think it got said because I was thinking about it strongly. So it's me, like a he's not a former friend of ours, but an old friend of ours from another podcast from years ago. This may be a little crackpotty. But even if it's in the vicinity of being, it might not even be in the vicinity of being correct, but if not right on the mark, no pun intended. Okay, so here it is. You know how we've observed that the computers in Lumen seem very retro? They're look like computers like from the 80s, certainly before the age of Wi-Fi. Much like the phones, we've noticed, look, they're flip phones and whatever, but I don't think we've seen someone with a genuine, real deal smartphone, like an iPhone, Android, whatever. I don't think we've seen, like when people were talking with Helena or whatever. I don't remember seeing that. Now look, I'm not a car guy. I don't even know how to drive. But wouldn't you say, isn't it fair, and I didn't Google this, maybe I should have, maybe whatever, and then I would know, and maybe if I was wrong, I wouldn't bring it up on the podcast. Wasn't it sometime over the last, let's say 25, 30 years or so, that cars really started to incorporate computer technology into them? And I'm wondering if maybe why we're seeing all these cars, models tend to be 70s, 80s, maybe early 90s, but I'm not really sure. Again, not a car guy. But now that you guys have pointed it out to me, now I can't not see it. Now I'm looking at the parking lot. I'm looking at all the cars. I'm looking at the one that they're driving, whatever. I'm wondering if this is their way of avoiding how things can be tracked or controlled or anything else that's very computery. And that's why, all these models are older. Now,
or they could be spot on.
Right. Now, at the same time, just to be totally transparent, as I wipe my suddenly dripping nose for a second, sorry about that. What's that?
Little AMSR.
Thank you. I was about to ask you. I was like, what are those letters again? BDS? No, wait, that's not it. That's for later. I have to also confess at the same time, so that way I can't pat myself on the back, because it hurts to move my shoulder because I'm old, like Brian. I did come across this direct quote from the series creator. And he said, "We use cars from a lot of different time periods to give a slight sense of disorientation." Now, that's one of those things that could be as simple as that, and that's the reason, or he doesn't want to say anything more than that, and he can get away with just saying that because he's not saying as well, because he could be, and there's also because of blah, blah, blah. He's not saying it's not purgatory. Anyway.
Well, I think I did bring this up to say, is this world sort of like Battlestar Galactica, that the reason in the TV show, right, the Galactica survived because it wasn't open to, attack.
Right. No, I remembered you bringing up Battlestar Galactica. I just didn't remember if we connected it to the Cars or specifically or not. But
I do have a time, a point of reference for time.
Okay.
And if it's a misdirect, it's a well done misdirect. But when Miss Cobell is driving in her car, she pushes a cassette into a cassette player.
Right.
And it is the Stone Roses. And the song by the Stone Roses that she plays was released in 1994. I went and looked it up, and I'm aware of the Stone Roses. They were, I think, first became known in 89, 90. This was from one of their much anticipated later albums, maybe even been their second album that took a few years to complete. But that song was released in 94. Now, you can play music over a scene, and it can be timeless, like, any number of movies showing modern rock over a medieval setting. But it shows her push the cassette into the cassette player and the song plays. So if you buy that as a reliable signpost, 1994 is when that song was released.
What are you saying it's the signpost for? You're not saying the show takes place in 1994, because that's not that can be disproven right now. I can disprove that right now.
Maybe.
No, they've already established. We've seen. I forget which episode it is, but if you look closely, we've seen things documenting Mark's birth, 1978. So they've already kind of established that this is taking place essentially now.
Well, I'm not saying that that's the year, but I'm saying as far as, a firm grasp, if you're setting the boundaries, that now we know this exists at least after 94.
I feel like they've literally, I mean, Ben Stiller, I think, or whatever. I when I was looking up the stuff about the Cars, I mean, I actually came across this, but I didn't think I didn't think we were questioning it at this point. This is supposed to be modern. This is supposed to be now, like 2022, 2023, whatever. Maybe they won't get into talking about COVID, although COVID's kind of the thing that kind of impacted this whole show, quite frankly. Maybe even ended up being kind of an inspiration to some degree. But I think this is supposed to be now. It's not the only question that might have existed was us looking at it as a dystopian future kind of a thing because of the element of Severance. And it's not, it's almost more a dystopian, what if things went this way instead of that way?
Right.
Kind of like,
alternate history.
Yeah. Like For All Mankind. It's like, okay, we're on a present track, but it's only everything changed because the Russians landed on the moon instead of the Americans. This is what would have happened if this organization who had been around for hundreds of years and eventually gets to a point where they've created developed this procedure of severance and then they just follow the track of every other all these other shows we watch. We have big evil corporations, or what are they up to, and whatever.
Well, I will occasionally spin my musical facts into unnecessary information, but I just thought I would. I thought I'd share that with the listeners.
I don't know. I had no problem with it. Just hell, if I'm in a car, I'm more likely to put on something from the 90s than anything that's been come out in the last 25 years, because I don't really like much of anything that's come out in the last 25 years. So if she put on a Beatles record, I wouldn't be thinking it's 1964. So,
So I have a question, Scott.
Oh, good. I mean, what?
Do you feel like you're in the groove?
Am I ever?
Because if you feel like you're in the groove, I'd like you to come with me, please.
Oh, no. Speaking of that, I'd like to get back to Dylan. Dylan's the one storyline that kind of, I don't know, is saying it made me sad too big an emotional admission for this? It's just, there's something with Dylan. I mean, from the beginning of the episode, and we're talking about the any Dylan right now, when you realize he's not pitching in on the search for Miss Casey. We see it from his attitude and actions with Mark, and then subsequently with Irving, who actually wants him to accompany him to O&D. And before it even happens, and again, I like that it actually happened in this episode. So, I was thinking it, then 5 minutes later it happened. You're realizing, oh, is he doing this because he wants to keep, he has to keep the thing about the information about the visitation center secret because he's the one, he believes himself to be the one person who would benefit from it. And I was thinking that, and then he's off to go there. And I thought it was really an interesting idea that he's eventually taken to the security office. This is the place where he, last time he was there, he had to say goodbye to his cherished belt, and he was, he received certain bruises and bumps from one Mr. Milchick. But much like they have essentially redone the break room and refashioned it for what we saw in the first episode, they've done a similar job with the security room. And apparently that it's also now the visitation center. And we had already met one new character that we had never heard of in this episode with the Gwendolyn Christie character. I think Nurse Jackie fans like myself probably were kind of jazzed to see Merritt Weaver show up on this. We've seen her on other things. There's that great Western series that she was also part of. I really enjoyed that as well. The Netflix one. Is it Godless? Is that the one that she was in?
Yeah, the one with one of the bridges.
Yeah, good one. Jeff Daniels is the main bad guy in that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, don't want to go down that track. But Merritt Weaver, excellent actress. Always enjoy getting to see her. And turns out she's the person who's playing Gretchen, or Gretchen G, as Miss Huang. By the way, Miss Huang, somehow, even with much less screen time, Miss Huang is even creepier in this episode than I think she's ever was in previous episodes. I mean, you made an observance last week, thankfully, because we'd forgotten the week before, to note the passing of David Lynch. There are two characters on this show that I feel are the most David Lynchian. I'm not going to say who the other one is. I'll let y'all, until the end. Because I'm going to guarantee you no one's going to come up with who the other person is. But I'll tell you right now, the second person I thought of, other than the person who I'm not mentioning, is Miss Huang. Everything about this character feels like, I feel like this could be a David Lynch-esque part of the whole damn show. He would cast someone like that. And she might be a slightly better actress than she should be for David Lynch. Because David Lynch thing's always like, I can't tell if they're actually a good actor or not.
They enter the cage zone. You don't know if they're a good actor acting bad or a bad actor acting good.
Right. So, Brian, the at least any Dylan stuff here, and we do get, and afterwards we do get, and I'd say one of the more unexpected, after the Mark S. Scott thing being the most unexpected thing about the episode, I'm going to say the second most unexpected thing about the episode is that we get a little bit of time with Outie Dylan.
Oh my goodness.
I was not expecting that. And
I wasn't either. And I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting the family visitation center this soon.
It was one of those things like, I wasn't sure it was actually going to happen at all.
Right.
Because
we weren't even sure it's real.
It might have been a carrot they were going to dangle, but it wasn't really a thing. And if it wasn't going to be a thing, I thought it would be, again, later in the season. I thought Milchick would be the one to bring him to it because Milchick's the one he's trying to, semi-bond with, even though maybe because they keep having fights, maybe it's not a good idea. I don't know. So what did you think of their interactions with the Innie Dylan? And then the very, what was as emotional as that scene was between, Gretchen and Innie Dylan. I felt the button to it all with Outie Dylan is kind of what made me overall just feel very sad about the whole thing. And to me, last season we thought Irving was the saddest character, and now I think it's Dylan. I really think, I think it's undoubtedly Dylan right now. And it changed my perspective totally on it.
It was, we haven't had a really big chunk of Dylan like this. And this was a really, really big chunk. And the thing I love about this show is the sort of specificity of being odd. Like the visitation is 18 minutes. Like why 18 minutes? Like that's just so random. And those little details really add to the overall weirdness of the show. And I love that. I love that early on, because it's one of those red herrings that the subsequent scene clears up. But she says, Seth warned me this might be weird. And then Miss Wong immediately says, please refrain from sharing privileged information. So like your first thought is, well, Mr. Milchek has talked to her and prepared her for this meeting. And it seems like he told her the truth. But then you start saying, well, is she real or is she an actor? Is this an act? But then we are disabused of that notion, later. Like they quickly dispel that.
Right.
I thought that the idea that you have these two lives at work and at home too, that you can go to work and tell people like your home life is something and be completely lying about it and be making it up. And Dylan has had these ideas about what, he was on the outside. And he comes to find out like his outie is kind of a loser. He keeps referring to himself as a loser. And I think in him, his wife sees what she wants him to be on the outside, that he is successful. And we've heard her say she wants him to be successful and just find something. And I thought it was really touching, though, that she talks about him, has pictures of the kids to show him. And there's that like delightfully tacky old timey photo of them as a family, the wall. And I think by the end, it has achieved what Milchek wanted, because he said, I'm going to make you all proud. And then she like just can't help but out of habit says, I love you. And then we cut to him at home, and like their house is kind of messy, and we learn like she has to work nights. And so he's home with the kids. It kind of gives you the idea they don't have much time to see each other. And maybe that's a reason she would agree to this visitation. And it's described as being weird good. It almost makes you think, is there going to be an affair with any Dylan and his wife on Outie Dylan, if that's even an affair? But it makes you see any Dylan be disappointed in his Outie, and it's kind of sad. And in his description of what his life is on the outside, it's sad that his inner life, now his goal is going to be to try to get 18 minutes with this woman. It's really kind of pitiful.
Well, he gives us in an episode that wasn't chock full of laughs. I did like Dylan's breakdown when he was trying to figure out what's the story behind Outie Dylan. The simple phrasing: he dumb, he a dick. So he's actually kind of a fuck up.
Yeah,
because she says he never quite found his thing. So what I thought was really sad, interesting and sad about it all, is when you're watching them interact, and this is confirmed by two things, by what we see later between Gretchen and Outie Dylan, and also recalling the conversation we overheard them have on the phone, before and after, I guess, the job interview in the previous episode. When her seeing any Dylan and the realization, like, it's the clean slate. Like, oh, this is Dylan, not encumbered by his fuck ups, and the fact that he his focus, his job is his focus. And even if he can't tell her what the hell it is he does down there, he's obviously good at it. He's obviously been successful at it. He's obviously earned a privilege that no one's ever had before, which is in direct contrast to the man she's married to and has had 3 children with, who seems to kind of be adrift. And it's actually, the more one thinks about it, the more amazing it is that Dylan ever chose or was convinced to go through the severance procedure. It kind of reminds me of someone I knew for many years, who seems to not have didn't have a direction, and maybe they're smart, but they didn't know how to apply it, and didn't want to be bothered, or just had a dim view of themselves and couldn't believe they could do something beyond that. I don't know. I'm actually talking about my father. So maybe that's why I kind of hooked into it. And it just, when I saw the way they acted in their actual home, and the realization that she's not really she's going to act like it was nothing, and she's not going to convey anything, because what is she going to say that could possibly make him feel better about things? It's already been shown that when she tries to be encouraging to him, he's dismissive of it and just doesn't want to hear it, doesn't want to accept it. Again, maybe I relate to that too. I'm someone who doesn't take compliments very well, even when I deserve them. And I'm not talking about you in the podcast. Fuck you, Brian. Actually important things. But I guess it just overall, there was such a melancholy, sad thing about it. And then finally, what you were saying about the idea of the cheating thing, whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, that thought occurred to me. It's like, okay, this show's already going to have a really big problem on its hands between, Mark, Helena, and what's going on there. And let's throw in Gemma/Ms. Casey while we're at it too. And then maybe Cobell does have a thing for him. Who the hell knows at this point? That, I don't know what shape that is at that point.
Well, it's like basically just 2 people with innies and outies can play relationship Foursquare. So it's really bizarre.
Relationship pentagram.
Yeah.
So I think the quickest one that we should bounce over to would be Irving, because I think Helena, that's going to take us to Harmony, and then we can end with Ilchik and comment about a certain other couple employees. I thought Irving's story was fairly brief, but kind of touching this week, because he, like we had mentioned earlier, he goes back to O&D for the first time since Bert's departure, and he actually spends some time with Felicia, who gets some decent screen time, not just this, quiet woman, to the left of Christopher Walken. I thought she was actually quite lovely to Irving, and far more so than I would have expected. And, you realize, oh, this is just going to be a sweet little moment between these two. And then we unexpectedly get information. We get real information. And I'm not talking about the revealing that Bert spent 2 hours on his hair the first time he went to go meet Irving. And by the way, what makes that super funny, it's funny no matter what, but when you realize it's Christopher Walken, and you think about Christopher Walken's hair, and I was like, really? Because basically
imagine if he didn't again. What's it look like if he didn't?
So basically, you hang upside down with a little bit of hairspray and a hairdryer. That's how you get Christopher Walken's hair. Whatever.
Well, the one point before that I want to just bring up is Helly was very empathetic to Irving.
Yes.
At the beginning of this, and says, "So, you haven't been back there? Well, we got you." And I wondered, it seemed way more empathetic than I would have expected. Not that Helly's a bad person, mm-hmm. but there was a lot of empathy there for Irving.
Right. So I'm glad you pointed that out, because that was one of those moments I was going, and when it happened, I was like going, I don't know if this makes me think it's more likely Helly or Helena right now. Because
I don't either.
You can make a great argument either way, which that, like the best debates are always ones where you can go either way. Like, Helena has probably, because everything's been taped, she's probably seen everything she needs to know about Irving. She's going to be, because they're part of this MDR thing. But which also means, however, she hasn't really seen Helly have really much interaction with Irving all this time. So this would be something a little bit out of the ordinary. But maybe it would make sense because they have the shared experience of the 39 minutes, yada, yada, yada. And there's a much more of a bond. She would think there's much more of a bond between them now than before, which technically there should be at this point because of the way they're all acting.
But even if you flip that, it's intelligence gathering.
It works in so many ways. It's I hate how smart it is.
It's good, but then we do learn sort of a throwaway fact, and that is that Annie Irving is actually a pretty good artist in his own right.
Oh yeah. Right. Oh, the drawings of Bert
every day.
And what was interesting, it was essentially the same drawing over and over, which it seemed there was something very familiar about that. I can't place my finger on it right now. Something else. I don't think it was on the show, but something I've seen in life where someone just drew the same picture of a person, like it was the same picture every day. I know that from something. Anyway, speaking of art, because I believe it's during his conversation with Felicia, he brings up the painting that he's aware that his Audi version has done. Right? Because
but she sees it. She
sees it. She sees it in the thing. Right. Yes. I'm sorry. Right. Okay, that's how we get there. Thank you. I couldn't remember. I don't know if he says that's where he got it from or not. The idea.
No, she says, "How do you have a picture of the exports hall?"
All right, which is huge because now we're referring to the hallway as the exports hallway. We had thought, and still do, that this is a hallway that leads to the elevator, which goes to the testing floor. Now, a couple things. First of all, I know the elevator that leads to the severed floor seems to only go to the severed floor, and that's it. Doesn't mean every elevator only goes to one floor in this facility. And it doesn't mean that the testing floor can't be where exports go as well. She mentions that we send a lot of shipments there, that they used to send them themselves. Now they pick them up and take them there or whatever.
I asked her, where is it?
Right.
And do you know how to get there?
I think we cut away before we get an answer to that. Right.
Yep.
Because I thought it was interesting that I don't think she really knows much more about it beyond what she says, but it's something.
No, but her demeanor changes.
Right.
And, it's obvious because she did get screen time and that actress did a wonderful job. It was nice to see them. It really was like the most coworkers sitting and having a break, like of any scene we've seen in a long time. Like just sitting and reminiscing about Bert and laughing about Bert. And I thought it was a really wonderful scene.
Absolutely. So let's finish up the MDR kids with Helena. Obviously, we've already touched on Helly quite a bit because she spent, other than that moment you just mentioned with Irving, the rest of the time she was pretty much spending with Mark S. I kind of feel we've kind of touched on her there, where really it's about Helena. And if we're talking about Helena, it's really about Helena meeting with Harmony, or Miss Cobell, however we want to refer to it, in the parking lot at Lumen. Which gives us the opportunity to point out that from the very beginning of this episode and then throughout the episode, Miss Cobell, she's having kind of a hard time in this episode. She's sleeping off on the side of the road, trying to determine what to do with herself, how to claw her way back into managing the severed floor, and being there when the Cold Harbor project finally reaches its fruition. So what I thought was interesting was that it's as we near the end of this episode, other than like the Mark Scout stuff, we get another face-off between these two people, which is also what we had at the very beginning or near the beginning of the previous episode. So now this is the second time we've had these two kind of facing off with each other. Last time they were seated, this time they're standing, whatever. And there's some really great kind of back and forth between them because they're both kind of trying to stand their ground. And you're trying to figure out who has the upper hand here. It's hard not to think Helena has the upper hand, generally speaking. And I like that she kind of, I don't know if there's a bluff involved here, but she says, all right. And she contacts the board and is like, oh, let's go speak to the board together. So what was your take on the way these two interact and then what Cobell essentially decides to do, at the end of this interaction? and why she made that decision. Because I was wondering if it's one of a couple things. I wonder if you had the same extreme thought that I did.
There were two main things I picked up on, and that is the security guy was really odd looking, and they focus on him for a minute. And like, I don't know if Cobell knows him, and maybe he's like the fixer for the company. Maybe he's Helena's bodyguard. But she comes on pretty strong, and Helena, quotes Kier back to her. And we know she's a pretty strong devotee of Kier. We've seen that Miss Cobell is. Asks about a reset, invokes Natalie, who we'll talk about in a minute, see if the board's available. I think it almost goes so smooth, and Helena is so physically different than Helly. We've talked about that before. She's so confident and so ready to fix it. I wondered about the word reset, and if that was the word that sort of spooked Cobell, because the word reset could mean any number of things. And she was afraid of either going in and being, taken off the board completely, or being wiped, or something like that. And she seems to be really afraid and leaves. And I'm not calling this. I'm just going to say, I didn't watch the credits week 2. I skipped them because my son came home. We were in a hurry to watch it. And you'd mentioned, hey, did you check out the credits? I was like, no, damn it. The one time I didn't. So I watched them. There is a car that looks a lot like Cobell's in the water. Like there's been a crash and it's in the water. I don't know if that portends anything bad, but I took this as Cobell basically caving to Helena and thinking I better get out of here. Like I've made my demands and I think I'm in danger. And I think she was leaving in fear, made one last ditch effort, and got the hell out of Dodge.
That's interesting about the opening credit sequence, the car that we see, because I think even in that video I mentioned there was thinking that was referencing Gemma, but in a way that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense, since if we saw Mark Scout at the tree and reacting the way he did, the impression we get from that is that a car smashed into a tree, and that's what led to Gemma's quote-unquote death, not that it was submerged in water. And it did look like, if I recall, it did sort of look like Cobell's odd little white car, but I'd have to take a look at those opening credits again to know that. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the security guy, although them having weird looking dudes in security is kind of a thing for the show, because, Mr. Grainer wasn't exactly the most normal looking fellow. He looked like he was like the defective cousin of like Ray Wise or something.
That's exactly who I thought. Talking about Lynchian. Yeah. Looked like Ray Wise.
So my thinking was, when she's walking with Helena, we're going to go speak to the board together. And as she's getting closer, there's a security guard there, and that might have been connected to it, absolutely, because he would be able to subdue her if need be. Because when I was like jotting down in my phone as I'm watching, like, does she think it's going to kill her? Like, no, we know it'd be something more nefarious than that. She would get the Miss Casey treatment. She becomes severed, but a permanent severed. So she would cease to exist, but she could still be useful for them. Why kill someone when you can do that? Why? They should never kill anybody. They should just be chipping them and just making them like permanent severed people. And it seems like they got a lot of property, and they got like, hundreds of offices, and they probably all have floors like that. There could be thousands upon thousands of people who have been fully severed. An army. Or maybe she was just afraid of getting a fruit basket. I don't know. But, I don't like pineapple. So, Yeah, that was my okay. It sounds like we're of similar minds on that then, because my feeling was okay. I've said what I had. I've again said what I had to say. I do love the phrase, and I used it in our intro that you have overestimated your contributions and you've underestimated your blessings. I love the phrase of that. It's just such a great way, because she's going right to, she wants to be a severed floor manager and Milchick must go. And I was like, ooh, I don't think Milchick didn't fucking undermine you, dude. You kind of did it to yourself as far as they're concerned. But Milchick, that's who we're going to now. By the way, so this is now the third episode of season 2. Now you've done a full rewatch. Oh wait, we both did a rewatch. I forgot I did a rewatch. Is this the first episode that we had, a considerable amount of Milchick in it, but he never interacts with any of the other regular characters as he has in pretty much any other episode? He certainly doesn't interact with anyone from MDR.
This is very much a reflection of him moving into middle management and having a lot less to do day to day with the MDR crew.
Right. So we got a couple things. We get the scene when this fucking scene. The scene with Natalie, who is the not spokesperson, kind of like the conduit to the board. And one of the things they've done to reward Milchick and what he's done for the company beyond the promotion is they've given him, and I'm going to mispronounce it. I know I will, because it's in my head that I'm going to mispronounce it, which is why I didn't use it in the intro. I was going to use this word in the intro, and I said, I'm going to fuck up how to pronounce it. They refer to the canonicalized paintings. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, okay. Recanonicalized.
Thank you. I know about canon. If you're a geek, no matter what your fandom is, you've used the word canon probably more than you should, because it's always embarrassing. Star Wars, superheroes, what the fuck you talking about? The paintings that and we see that they're revised versions of paintings we've seen before, except they've been redone in a way so that someone of Milchick's complexion can relate better, to make a deeper connection to it. It's I don't know if I would say it's wildly offensive, but it's kind of ballparking it. It kind of is. This scene between his reaction to it and Natalie's reaction and her, that eerie grin that she has to keep plastered to her face. And you see, and it's a credit to the actors. I didn't look up the name of the actress who plays Natalie. I apologize. I forgot to look that up because I would like to have given her proper credit. We'll mention it next week. It's almost like a Bono line from a U2 song, or a version of it. Her mouth is saying one thing, but her eyes were saying something else. Because she's also a woman of color, lighter skin, but still clearly, she is. And I believe she says that she also had gotten something along these lines from them as well. And you realize, oh, this is what they do. You start wondering about the complexion of the board. You wonder if it's pretty much Snow White, so to speak.
I think she's guiding him on how to react.
I think she's trying.
She's trying to send him the signal, like, you need to say you appreciate this, like, because, then he says, oh, it's good to see myself reflected in these paintings.
Oh, absolutely.
And she says something like, I greatly appreciated it when I received my set of these paintings. And it makes you wonder if, like, these paintings are only given to, employees of color.
Oh, I think I think that almost goes without saying that is absolutely straight up the reason why they're doing it. They're looking at a world and a society where they've taken the idea that, because, it's been shown that, people of color, they prefer if, depictions of Santa that are of color, or Jesus was a person of color, which actually if you believe in Jesus at all and you've realized where he was and when it was, he probably absolutely was a person of color. Could have been white and blonde, idiots. It just takes it to such a creepy extreme. And I know I used the word creepy again, but come on, Lumen, everything about Lumen's fucking creepy, whatever. It's super, super tone deaf. And it's showing kind of like an unawareness of what this really means. And it's disturbing the way having a child be basically the second in command and ordering people around, to as much as that's what Huang does at all. By the way, I don't mean to circle back to something we talked about already, but the reveal that in the visitation center that, they're going to be listening in the whole fucking time. So that whole thing about, I guess there are places where they are going to be listening in because they're going to be listening this whole time. And it's going to be this little girl doing it. Oh, by the way, love that. Is it Dylan who brings up the it's like, I don't want to upset you, but why?
Right. That's right in the creepy hall walk. And he continues nervously to ask questions to fill the silence, to which she just completely ignores him.
But going back with Milchick and Natalie, two things. First, the fact that we see towards the end that Mr. Milchick, Seth, puts the paintings away, puts them back in a storeroom, stock closet, whatever. The image of him kind of putting the crepe paper packing paper back over the painting again, kind of almost putting which is white. And so putting the white back over the black and the Kier image, whatever, kind of is all he's not putting these up. He's not going to keep them in a special place. He's just putting it away like something he never wants to see.
And he's not taking them home.
And I was wondering if his reactions to these things and what he sees happening, his clear disdain for Miss Huang that we saw in a previous episode, his annoyance at things like, not being able to remove the "Hello, Miss Cobell" from his computer, and what that really, if that means something more than just a simple, the IT team hasn't gotten on it. You wonder if it's a crack in his veneer and that maybe he might be someone that could be pushed to go against Lumen eventually. And I kind of think that could be where they would go with his character. I think
what we've seen is he was a very dedicated company man.
Yeah.
And Lumen continues to just score own goal after own goal over and over. And like the team, the people working there aren't the ones that are breaking him. It's upper management that's breaking him.
And the final thing I wanted to say before we put the bow on the episode, and it's a nod to you and what you had talked about in a previous episode, and going back to Natalie, it's when we see Natalie in the outside world talking with Rickon about that book of his, and the idea of, as his sister put it, and I put it at the very top of the podcast, doing an any cut of the book because it had such a profound effect on, the MDR employees, et cetera, et cetera. And I just thought, as I'm watching that scene, oh Lord, this little interaction here is going to further feed the fire that burns within Brian, his burning theory about how Rickon is himself going to be. No, actually, you think he already is a Lumen naughty, but I thought it's like, oh God, no.
Well, I know that you haven't checked it out, but the beginning of the audio book for Rickon's book says he's only allowed to disclose on advice of counsel so much of the book because there are ongoing things. So it places it post this idea that there's going to be a new cut for Ennis, that you wonder if it's going to be the Lumen Employees Guide by Rickon. So I very, very interesting. And I love, we got to give love. And there's a lot of love on social media. I had no idea. Devin everybody loves her. The way she clocks this immediately and is not rude, but not super, favorable to Natalie.
I when we talk about our favorite characters on the show, and Milchick's right there, whatever, but I gotta say, the sister Devin, I love her every every word that comes out of her mouth. I love her bringing up that he stuck her with the bill at the diner in that episode. I was like, oh, I would say the same damn fucking thing. In fact,
she's the most naturalistic character. The actress is doing a wonderful job. She is killing it, and I think she will grow and grow as this show goes.
She kind of has she's like an American version of Olivia Colman. Every time I look at her, it kind of looks a very similar look to her. Anyway, so I think that's pretty much the episode.
Yeah, that's it.
Another really strong episode. I think every episode is going to be strong of this series. And just loving the fact we get to talk about it. And we will be back to cover the 4th episode in about a week's time. That next episode is going to be titled Woes Hollow. That's WOE''S, Woes Hollow. Now, before that podcast comes out, there will be another STBD podcast that will be heading your way, kids. It's one that I've been dreaming about kicking off literally for years. It's finally happening this week, where we will be producing a massive Twilight Zone rewatch podcast. That first podcast, which will be covering the very first 2 episodes of the original Twilight Zone, which y'all can watch on Paramount Plus. You can probably find it some other ways. You might want to, if you want to pay $1 or $2 on YouTube or, I don't know, Roku or something. I don't know. The podcast, this episode will feature 4 people. The resident zone head here, me, along with Jamie, Brian, and Joe Fortunato. This crew will probably be individually co-hosting most, if not all, of the subsequent Twilight Zone podcasts for the rest of this year and future years. Anyway, I am super excited for that one. I believe I've already put more work into that first podcast that we haven't recorded than the 3 Severance ones that we already have recorded. And Brian, me and you, have been trying to come up with a truly different and memorable intro and outro theme for the Twilight Zone podcast, which we probably will change for season 2. I'm just going to warn you about that ahead of time. Yeah, I'm making you give me take after take after take. It's like, more ominous. That note doesn't, too muddy. Too busy.
I received my paintings in the mail, Song Cycle of Scott.
How do I redo these paintings so everyone looks like they have a southern flair to them? Anyway, as far as our podcast is concerned, you can find us on most podcast platforms. You can also find us on Instagram and that stupid X feed thing. I don't know, one of these. I will sign us up for an account on one of the preferable social media sites. I just, with less hate-filled idiots on it, but I just haven't gotten around to it. Anyway, thanks as always to Brian for co-hosting and bringing as you always do. I feel honored to be in the presence of the king of all podcasting here. I'm making a joke. He made a comment on another podcast, which was really a joke about someone on that show. I know he wasn't being serious, but I am going to get a soundbite of that, and I'm going to be using it for the next few years. Your intro, you're never going to have to give your own intro. I'm going to use that soundbite.
That's, yeah, well,
it's going to be amazing.
It's the beauty of talking into a recording.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to the listeners who I hear have been appreciative. And hopefully you can appreciate the job that we've been doing for you, because we do it for you, the listeners.
Good night.
Let's get on that fucking elevator now.